Another surprise out of the White House this week was Trump changing his tone on Russia and specifically really changing his tone on President Putin. I mean, it was not even, feels like years ago, but it was not even 5 months ago that Trump got so upset with Ukrainian President Zelensky that he essentially threw him out of the White House before he had time to eat his scheduled lunch. So let's just take a quick trip down memory lane.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. But right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III.
But on Tuesday, Trump had this to say about Putin.
We get a lot of thrown at us by Putin, for you want to know the truth. He's very nice all the time, but it turns out to be meaningless.
So, Peter, what has changed? Has Trump come around to Zelensky? Has he soured on Putin? Is it something we can't even fathom yet?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. You know why Zelensky got under Trump's skin at that thing a few months ago? Because he was telling him Putin is going to shovel a lot of BS your way, that you cannot trust Putin. And Trump took offense at that. He says, no, that's just not true. In effect, what he's saying is, I've been through so much with my friend Vladimir Putin. We went through the Russia hoax together, you know, blah, blah, blah. And now what Trump has discovered is what Zelensky told him is basically right. You cannot assume that Putin is your friend. You cannot assume that he wants a peace deal, because he doesn't. He's made that very clear. Now, you know, it's striking to hear Trump say what he said this week because of 10 years of bromance between the two, right? Which is still seemingly inexplicable to a lot of people. Why would Trump be so favorable toward Putin for so long? Has he come around to believe what everybody else already believed, which is that Putin is not his friend?
Which his own intelligence services have been telling him since his first term for the better part of a decade.
And his friends like Lindsey Graham and other Republicans would tell him, you know, Marco Rubio used to be a hawk. He would tell, the old Senator Rubio would have told him that. I don't know about Secretary Rubio. Now, does that mean that they'll stay, you know, estranged? We've seen with Trump before, of course. He has, you know, he goes in and out with people, right? He gets mad at people and then they're back into his orbit. So if they had a deal next week of some sort that Trump could tout, he would suddenly be friends again, probably with Putin. But it is interesting that he has learned that Putin is not the guy he thought he was, because, and it's important to remember that Trump thought they were so close that he could snap his fingers and have a peace deal within 24 hours, he told everybody. Not even after his inauguration. He said he could do it before his inauguration, and he's discovered otherwise.
Right, and Nancy, I mean, one thing that was striking was Trump says this, but this week, after Trump's comments, Russia and Putin ramp up their attacks on Ukraine. I mean, can you take us through why Putin still seems to feel so emboldened?
Well, so what's happening on the ground is we've seen a huge uptick of the use of drones and missiles on the Capitol, killing at least 14, literally hundreds of drones. And then today we saw an attack on a maternity hospital in Kharkiv. And this is, when I give you a sense of sort of the level, the ramp up, we've seen more drones used in some cases in one day than all of last year by Russia. And what that does is really overwhelm the air defense system of Ukraine at a time when the U.S. has withheld the air defense missiles that would protect the capital and other parts of the country. And I think he's doing this in part because he sees a Ukraine that is increasingly vulnerable because it's drawing down on the U.S. provided air defense missiles, and potentially sees a divide between the United States and Ukraine in terms of the promise of enduring support. That these attacks have happened more on the Capitol, have been so aggressive, and have really forced Ukraine to make big decisions about what air defense capability they're going to use to try to protect the Capitol, has been challenging.
You mentioned those defensive weapons, which Trump just sort of reauthorized the shipment of, but those had been stopped briefly by Defense Secretary Pete Hegth, it is worth noting, without telling Trump what he was doing. They're now back on, but this sort of on-again, off-again defensive weapons dance. I mean, what does that reveal about fissures between the president and Hegth, fissures in the administration? Nancy, let's stick with you for a second. Explain what we should take away from that.
So just a little background. Under the Biden administration, there was a promise of consistent weapon shipments to Ukraine, and those were supposed to run out about the summer. And so this was one of those shipments in which, and it included things like Patriot missiles, Hellfires, Gimlers, key weapons systems and missiles for Ukraine. And so we heard at the start of the month that the Secretary of Defense had suspended those. seemingly without telling the president. The president said he didn't know. It's not even clear whether the whole shipment was suspended. When you ask at the Pentagon, shockingly, you can't get a clear answer on what was suspended, why, and what is resuming now. So then we heard from the president, I don't know, but I want to resume them. He gave an interview to NBC in which he said, we are actually going to resume this shipment of defensive weapons and NATO's going to pay for it. Now, technically, NATO can't pay for it, but NATO members could. And so we're looking now to see if that's going to happen and what that package looks like. The problem is so many people focus on the shipment and what Hegth said. To me, what's critical is once you start turning weapon systems on and shipments on and off, it is very hard for Ukrainian military planners to defend themselves. You know, when you turn off a missile system, there's a lot of logistical changes that happen. Ukraine might move a system from one part of the country and the other. When 2 days later, the U.S. turns it back on, those systems are still on trains. They're having to reconfigure their battlefield to this on and off approach to U.S. shipments.
Right, and you're giving us an explanation of us now 7 months into this conflict in Trump's term, but Peter had mentioned that Trump had said he was going to do this on day one. And Zolan, I'm curious, I know you have some reporting on this. Trump actually believed this. Can you just explain why he believed this?
I mean, I don't know about the 24 hours. I have talked to people who really think that Trump did think that his relationship with Putin, that the fact that Putin favored him over other candidates, that he could use that leverage, his deal-making leverage, to get a deal here. And what he has found out is that embracing Vladimir Putin comes with few results. It comes with few actual productive results here. And it's something that, yes, you know, he was saying to those around him, but his Republican allies, you know, were also telling him in recent weeks that they could all be getting played. This was something that Senator Graham said as well, who's put forth a sanctions bill that we still don't really know if the White House supports at this point. It would impose sanctions on Russia. So, you know, he has had reminders that Putin could be playing him this entire time. And now you're starting to see the frustration really bubble up to the surface after a lot of the hyperbolic rhetoric that we saw during the campaign.
So I'm so glad you brought up the sanctions bill, because I think despite what we heard from the president, to me, we will not know if there's a real shift unless two things happen. One, we actually see weapons and defensive systems going to Ukraine, and the president signs that sanctions bill. That is a tangible example of the president saying, I am fed up with Putin. Words are one thing, but those are the two things on the table right now that would signal that actually the U.S. is shifting its position.
And after he posted on Truth Social that Putin had gone crazy after, or lost his mind after one of Russia's aggressive attacks on Ukraine, I asked him outside of Air Force One if he supported his own allies' sanctions bill. And at that point, he did not say one way or the other. He said, I have to read it. I'm not sure. He didn't answer the affirmative. He's been asked since then as well. Still, we have not had that outright support for the bill.
That sanctions bill has a cost, because what it does is it tries to cut off the oil supply to places like China. It doesn't want other people to buy Russian oil. That's fine. But if you take that oil off the market, it means prices go up. And that's why Biden's administration wasn't willing to do that. They did a whole lot of other sanctions, but they weren't willing to take all the Russian oil off the market because of the price at the gas pump. And Trump is very sensitive to the price of the gas pump and bragging in recent days about how it's lower than it had been. To sign that bill and then effectuate those sanctions is a risk for his domestic support.
He has signaled that there might be a big announcement coming next week. Right. So I think the early indications are that he might actually support the sanctions bill, and well, that remains to be seen. But maybe he's made that calculation that it's worth the risk. And
there is a waiver in the bill. He could finagle and sign it and use it as leverage, maybe, to get Putin back to the table. But.
And there's a political cost as well, right? There are 86 signatories to the bill. Yeah. This issue, the support for Ukraine, has become a bipartisan issue. He has faced criticisms from within his own party. So you're right, there's an economic cost, but he's also facing a political one.
That's right.
And Peter, beyond the sanctions bill, right, it feels like Russia has been, by the United States, given the ability not to lose,
Yeah.
but not the ability to actually win.
Right.
What would be required to actually allow Ukraine to win, if that's what Trump even wants to happen?
I mean, the truth is, the United States provided tens of billions of dollars worth of weapons under Biden, who's willing and wanted to help Ukraine, and still, as you say, didn't go as far as some people thought they should go. The idea that Trump and this Republican Congress is going to go further than that seems unlikely, which is what Putin is gambling on. Putin is gambling that Trump is going to walk away, that Trump doesn't really care about Ukraine, that Trump actually has other fish to fry with China and trade and tariffs. And that's why he thinks that he can continue to stiff Trump, because then he will have the upper hand in Ukraine.
Particularly on foreign policy, too, is when we see that the president wants to lean into issues that are a win, not intractable.
Exactly. There's a lot to discuss, but unfortunately, we have to leave it here. Thank you all for joining me, to our guests, and thank you to our viewers at home for watching us.